is a new project system for ASP.NET. So when you do file new project and all the Solution Explorer integration and integration with build and publishing, those are the main things that I'm focused on a day-to-day basis. Besides that, I've got a big background in MS Build and written a few books on MS Build in case anybody's interested.
Yeah, man, you wrote 4 books on MS Build.
4 books.
And you snagged the msbuildbook.com domain from all the other people.
The one and only. Yeah, there was so many people that was just, it was very difficult to get that.
Both of those other people writing books about MS Build.
Yeah, it was very problematic to acquire that domain.
Cool.
All right.
And I'm still me, so there's my slide about myself. So I'm going to have one of those every show. All right, well, let's dig into Visual Studio tooling. We talked with Daniel Roth, and he went through some of the basics of what's going on in MVC 6 and ASP.NET 5. But now we're going to kind of up-level a little bit, and we're going to look at Visual Studio tooling.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So one of the big things that I'm going to basically kind of try to bring home is the fact that we have spent a lot of time making sure that Visual Studio kind of will get out of your way when necessary. So what I mean by that, if you're building ASP.NET 4 projects with Visual Studio 2013, the mantra there was basically, if you want to create ASP.NET applications, you have to use Visual Studio, and you have to do things in a particular way. And if you ever went outside of that workflow or tried to use any additional tools, you might run into some problems and some pain points. So for instance, having all the files listed in the CS proj or VB proj is one problem. So if I used a tool like, let's say, Grunt or Bower or Yeoman to generate any files, I'd have to then make sure that I somehow was able to update my CS proj and VB proj to have those files listed as well. With ASP.NET 5, the kproj doesn't have any files listed. So if you have any third-party tools that are creating files, they'll just automatically become a part of the project, and things will just work. And then we'll take a look at some other areas that the Visual Studio tooling has improved, like we've listed here, like Intellisense, and the configuration system is different. And then we have this concept of commands as well.
Yeah, so I want to dig into that more than we saw with Dan.
Exactly, yep. All right, so I've got this sample project loaded here. Let me open the folder that's containing this project, and then I want to show you some files that are in that folder. Sorry, the folder didn't get open for some reason. Let's try that one more time.
I didn't know you can do that. You're right-clicking and saying Open Containing Folder on the.
Oh yeah, that's been there since like 2012, I think.
Yeah, thanks for pointing out that I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, I'll take all credit for that feature.
Oh yeah,
so,
that was all
definitely
nice.
Very happy we're able to ship that for you. Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
So let's take a look at some of the files that we have here.
Okay.
We've got project.json and package.json, which we'll actually look at those. But the file I want to show you here is this kproj file.
Okay.
So let me unload this, and then I'll show you what's the contents of this file, and then why is it used. So this is basically, it's pretty much a bare bones MS Build file. So if you're familiar with MS Build, this syntax will look pretty familiar to you. The big thing to take away, there's no files listed here. So if you've ever worked on a Visual Studio project before that was in a repository, you might have run into a problem where merging this file has been problematic. So let's say if we're working on the same project and I add 3 files and then you add 4 or 5 different files, it was always like a merge problem, especially because the files are not alphabetically ordered.
Yep.
So you always have this merge problem on the CS proj file.
Well, and it's an XML file, and you got to make sure you close the tags correctly,
Exactly.
and you got to isolate certain lines, and it's a hassle because all you did was add a file.
Exactly right. It's definitely a lot more tedious than what it should be. I'm happy to say that we finally were able to get rid of the list. This file is pretty minimal. We've got like the IIS Express port here, but there's very little besides that. The important part is there's nothing that's critical to my application here. It's all just kind of data for Visual Studio to provide some extra features like IIS Express.
So do I even need it?
You don't necessarily need it, and I'll show you how Visual Studio can recreate the file in scenarios that you don't, but odds are you probably want your IIS Express port to be the same every time you open it. So in some scenarios, you're going to want to keep it, but it's not strictly required.
Okay.
Yep, so now let me show you what happens if I were to add a file to the project from Windows Explorer, and this could be a, we'll go into www.root here, which is the location for static files. Let's say I want to add let's say I want to add just a simple HTML file here.
Okay.
you can see as I'm typing here that it actually starts showing up in Visual Studio. So I've got simple.html, simple.html. So I didn't have to edit.
Dan had talked about these file watchers. Somebody's really paying attention inside of Visual Studio to what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So what's happening for every project that you create, we actually will start a file watcher on that particular folder, and then any folders or files that are added will automatically show up in Visual Studio. The file watcher was actually too good at one point, because what we noticed was we were writing files into the folder, and it would actually pick up like the temporary OS file names that were temporarily being used when we moved it and copied the file. So we actually had to fine tune it. So we've kind of got this like the smart delay saying, hey, I've noticed that the file's been dropped here. I'm going to wait X milliseconds for other operations, and then it kind of buffers the changes and whatnot. So yeah. Yep.
Does that mean that any file I put there has to be there? Can I have a file in that folder and exclude it?
Yes, you can. Yeah, that's a great question. Yep, and then that's actually some of the features that we're working on right now, the ability to exclude files from Solution Explorer. I'm not sure if this build actually has it. This is like a daily build.
Yeah, everyone's coming with daily builds, which I think we appreciate, actually. So
yeah, no, I don't
keep
have
it
it
up
on this one. Yeah, I don't have it on this one, but
where will that be stored, do you think, in the future?
I'll show you where it's going to be stored. So project.json actually already has, they already have the ability to exclude files from publishing and exclude files from your project. And I've just showed you that here in project.json. So we've got the exclude option, and then we have pack exclude. So if you had any CS files that you wanted to, that were just sitting there, but you wanted to exclude them for compile, you can go in and edit this file.
Okay. And then you're going to make it so we can do that, and there'll be a gesture, and it'll show up there.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
So it really is inverting the way we used to think about things. It's include all by default.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, cool.
Yep, and I think this is a way that it's much simpler and much easier to use, and it's really simple for any third party to integrate with ASP.NET now, because you don't necessarily have to understand our project. All you have to understand is, hey, you've got this folder and these conventions, and then start parting on that. So yeah, exactly.
All right, cool.
Yep. So yeah, exactly. So we've got exclude here. That's exclude compile. And then pack exclude is to exclude anything from publishing.
Right, and we'll learn more about publishing in a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. But you'll have some right-click exclude from project, exclude from publishing later on as well. Yep, so that was that. While we're inside this file, why don't we take a look at, and we'll come back to the command support later on, but let's take a look at the frameworks that are listed here. And this actually, a lot about ASP.NET is actually looking at experiences that we've had for a long time, and saying, hey, is this the correct model for us to have for these experiences? And one good example, and another good example of that is how we actually work with target frameworks. So in the past, if you had a project or a library that you wanted to build for multiple different target frameworks, you would probably use build configurations, and what you would do is you would create one build configuration for every particular platform.
So a build configuration would be like what, like debug and release?
Debug and release, yep.
And then you'd make a one for debug for
this
Windows
particular
phone.
target. Yeah, so let's say if you wanted to create something for some particular PCL variant, and you had 4 or 5 different one of those, you'd probably create 4 or 5 different debug configurations. A good example of that is the Newtonsoft JSON package. I think it has probably 8 or 9 different build configurations, and 8 or 9 different set of artifacts that come out of that. So the way that you would build that inside Visual Studio is you'd create the build configurations, and then you would build. But unfortunately, in Visual Studio, you can only build for one configuration at a time. So in that model, if I introduce some code that only built on one or some particular subset of those target frameworks, the only way that I would actually know that is to switch to that other build configuration, build my project, get the error or warning, and then resolve it at that point. With ASP.NET 5, we've pretty much turned that upside down as well and said, hey, I'm going to declare the different target frameworks that this project is interested in building, and then we're simultaneously going to build all of them, and if you have any errors, we'll also represent those to where you can see which target framework has the error.
So do you get a union of all errors across all frameworks?
Yes, right. Yep, and then for errors that are the same also across the frameworks, we'll dedupe those. So in some case, you might end up with an error that says, hey, this particular thing's not available.
Okay.
So let me show you that. And then this kind of goes along with another feature that's called combined Intellisense. So let me show you what happens.
Yeah, I think you, there you go.
Yeah, let me show you what happens if I try to use a function or object that's only defined in one of those particular frameworks. I'll just do a simple string replacement. Okay, let's sit here for a second. Okay, so
Dan
here,
talked a little bit about this, but I didn't quite understand.
yeah, so what's happening is now Intellisense will show you all the methods which are available to you.
What is the little yield sign there?
Yeah, so the exclamation point here, basically that's the symbol for warning. It says, hey, I've got some additional information here for these particular ones. We could pick any one of these, but I'm just going to grab replace. Oh, I guess that's a bad example. All right, let's just go into clone. So now if I were to go into clone, oops.
Yeah, Dan was having some trouble with this as well. We saw it
Here
there.
we go.
We saw it there, but we didn't see it on the method.
Yeah, I'm not sure why. It should pop up when I'm actually on it, but in either case, let me zoom in on this, and we can take a look at the result here. It says, hey, the clone method is available for ASP.NET 5, but it's not available when we're running ASP.NET 5 on the core CLR. So in this case, I have to basically determine that, is my project going to be targeting the core CLR at some point? If it is, then I can use clone for the full .NET for desktop, but I'd probably have to do some type of #ifdef for the cloud optimized.
What if you call clone right now, just call it, and then compile? Will we get an error in the task manager? In the
Yes. Yep.
the output somewhere?
Yeah, we will.
What is that going to look like?
Look at it. Oop, wrong one. Sorry. Let me open up the error list here.
Oh, okay.
Yep. And then if I were to
Even though we're not, no, we are in that context though right now. So right now at the top of the screen there in the upper left corner there by startup, it says we are currently on core 5. And if you pull that down and switch to on the full framework and do a compile.
I think this will still fail.
And here it says project core 5. Yeah, so
Exactly,
it's
yeah.
telling you the context that it's running within.
Yep. And
So in
now-
this case, you're saying because you've chosen to target both, you have to really manage the errors for both because you decided you're targeting both.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Yep. If I wanted to go ahead and decide to, hey, core CLR is not interesting for me for this particular project. I can,
Before you save that, go back over and unpin Solution Explorer for me and open up references. So right now, we're building for both, right?
Right. Yep.
Okay, and then if you've just removed ASP.NET Core 5, so if you save that, what happens? It just disappears.
That one goes away. Yep.
And that's a way of, you just edited an entire build configuration there. You didn't have to mess around in any dialogues, it just happened.
Pretty much. Yeah. Exactly.
That's pretty
It
cool.
wasn't formally like what people normally consider a Visual Studio build configuration.
Ah,
But
okay.
yeah, exactly right. Yep.
Okay, in this case, yeah, it's not a build configuration, but the essence was, the result is now it's only compiling for the one.
That's right. Yep.
Cool.
Yeah. Yep. So basically, so build configurations are defined over here.
Okay.
Whether you're on debug or whether you're on release, we'll always build for every target framework that's listed in project.json.
I see.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Let me undo that change, and then I want to undo this change here as well. Okay.
And it won't, when you hit save, I guess it'll just pop back in, won't it?
Yeah, it should just come back in. Yep. And let me show you how can we pick a different CLR to actually run with. So these are, what's the CLRs that we're actually building with.
All right.
So if we wanted to pick a particular version that we wanted to run with, so I'll show you that.
Yeah,
so
I guess
the restore is completed, then we can go in.
That's restoring, presumably from NuGet.org at this point.
Exactly. Yep.
There we go. Now it's done.
Yeah. All right. So let's go into properties. So our properties are kind of bare bones right now. But this is an area that we'll be beefing up in the next version. So you'll see a lot of additional properties, and then you'll be able to define what you're going to be debugging as well.
Okay.
Yep. So
Come early next year.
Yeah. So I'm not sure when they're going to show up, but
Okay.
yes, it should be pretty soon. We also have a property to whether you want to build artifacts on disk or not. So I'll show you that as well here in a little bit. But let's go to the application tab here. where we've got all the target KRE versions. So these are the different versions of the CLR which are available to ASP.NET on this machine.
And because you're a dev, as well as PM, you're writing code too, you've got all sorts of basically daily builds, don't you?
Yep.
Your own personal daily builds of the core CLR. And it's interesting, if you look at the difference between Alpha 3 there, it was called Server 5.0, and then Alpha 4, we changed that name to core CLR. So you've been tracking this for a while.
Yeah, and the fact is, these are, let me actually just show you where
I only have 2 or 3 on my machine.
Yep, let me show you where they're maintained at in case you ever have the need to go through and delete it or...
Really? You can just go in a folder and delete it. That's all you got to do?
Yep, so I'm going to my user profile folder. I'm going to go into, I think it's just in
right there.
User profile, and then go to KRE, and then packages here. So everything that's listed here is actually a folder in this directory here. So you can just delete the whole folder, and then next time you install the ASP.NET command line tools, it'll just bring down, I think, two packages for every install. Yep.
Go ahead and go into one of those folders real quick.
Okay, sure. All right, so we're going to go ahead and go into one of these folders here. So you've got the NuGet pack and the spec, and then the files are just laid out as well.
That's the NuGet package unfolded.
Yeah, exactly. So here you can see, if you saw Dan Roth was executing some of the command line tools, we can see those tools are actually in these folders here. So when you execute the kpm.cmd, that's in this folder, k.cmd is in this folder, and then klr.exe, which is, that's what's used to host your app, is all contained inside these folders. Yep. All right, perfect. So let me, I guess now that we're kind of talking about this list here, we can also get the list from the command line. And as we show you command line scenarios, the thing to keep in mind is Visual Studio. If you're a Visual Studio user, you don't have to care about the command line. We'll take care of all that stuff. But we want to show you that all the experiences that we're building in Visual Studio are basically built on top of command line experiences. The reason why we want to show you that is because then you can realize that it's easy for you to create your own kind of experience that builds on top of ASP.NET. And also, if you didn't want to use Visual Studio for one reason or another, it's possible for you to realize all the same goals with whatever tool set you want. So as we show the command line, keep that in mind. Those command line scenarios, if it's not required for the Visual Studio customer. So if you like using Visual Studio, definitely keep using Visual Studio, and you're not going to be forced to go into command line scenarios.
So in a lot of demos, we're seeing people running around in the command line. A lot of demos of ASP.NET 5, people are doing that. I think it's because we enjoy seeing what's underneath. We enjoy seeing the plumbing sometimes.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that their command line is required, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, command line is definitely not required, definitely added bonus. And for some experiences, you might have a better experience on command line if that's the type of customer, if that's the type of experience that you like. We're not trying to force Visual Studio customers to go to command line, and we're not trying to force command line customers to go into Visual Studio either. If you're comfortable with UI and being inside Visual Studio, we want you to stay there. But if you're comfortable with command line tools and doing things more manually without tooling, we want to make sure that you can do those things and that you'll still have a really great experience with ASP.NET, and all the other tools will just kind of get out of the way. And we want to make sure those mixed scenarios are well supported as well. So let's say if 2 or 3 of us are working together and one guy's using Visual Studio and the other guys are using Mac, we should have a great experience for those scenarios as well. And actually, that's a good segue for me to move into another demo of how Visual Studio will actually move out of the way. But before we do that, let me show you on command line, how can we get the same list of those target frameworks. So I can do kvm list, and then that'll show me the different target frameworks which are available. And then I can even do kvm upgrade to download the latest version that's available. Okay. Let me go back to my project. I'm just going to close the solution here. And then I'm going to go back into the folder list here. And I'm going to just go through and delete all the files which were added by Visual Studio. So those are the kproj files, the kproj.user file. And then I'll do the same for this shared library. And I didn't do a really great job explaining this project or the solution when I loaded it up. It's a web project. That's called multi-project here. And this web project has a reference. It has a reference to a class library project which is here, shared library. So now imagine that this solution was checked in on a Mac, and then I just cloned the repository, and now I want to open. Now I want to. Oh well, I'm having mouse.
You lose your mouse there?
My mouse. Okay, now
there it goes.
It's back. Okay,
back.
sorry about that. Let me copy this. So now I'm gonna browse out to this folder, multi-project, go into source. Actually, let me delete the solution file too, just so nothing.
So you're removing all of the Visual Studio parts of the thing.
Exactly. Yep. Everything that Visual Studio created. So I'll do File, Open Project again. Paste in the path. Multi-project, and then here I can see project.json.
Okay.
Let's watch the folder. All right, let me go into source, multi-proj. So it creates the kproj, and then when it discovers the class library, it should create the kproj for the class library as well.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, so in this scenario then, the Visual Studio user can either choose to check those files in, or he can choose to just let it sit on his box. So that's what I meant by, the file is technically required by Visual Studio, but it will just create it when it needs, if it's not there. So the information there is non-critical information.
And the person on the Mac or the other machine, they can run KVM list and KVM use and things like that, and we'll dig more into that with Lewis next. But the Visual Studio person gets that good experience, and it seems like that's kind of a theme throughout what's going on in Visual Studio. The tooling is letting you use text files like project.json, but it's also updating the UI at the same time. So you can do your NuGets here, you can do them over in the GUI, you can do them in a text file.
Yeah, exactly, yep.
Back and forth.
Yep.
So that's kind of a change in philosophy a little bit, wouldn't you say?
I think so too, and it also kind of, it just kind of, highlights the fact that we're really trying to appeal to a wider set of audiences, So before, we had managed NuGet packages and, we had the dialogue there. But we didn't give a really great experience for users who are directly editing packages.config back then. But now we say, hey, I think that there's a large number of people who like using the dialogue, but there's also a significant portion of folks who don't like using the dialogue, and they want to have full control over what's happening and where things are going. Visual Studio will be smart for you, but in some cases, it may not do exactly what you might have done. So for example, when you add a NuGet package into your project, we'll examine the available target frameworks, and if your package doesn't support the core CLR, then we'll place it only in the frameworks which do support it, so the full .NET for desktop or vice versa. There might be some scenarios where you said, hey, I don't want Visual Studio trying to be smart or trying to help me. I literally just want this particular string in this particular spot of project.json. And then we'll do everything that we can to help you, including like a really great experience with Intellisense. And then, the UI responsiveness of showing it up in Solution Explorer and then helping you to have those gestures as well. So yeah, it's kind of we're trying to basically appeal to a wider audience and trying to create tools for both, hey, I'm really geared towards UI, and then I'm really geared towards I want to have absolute control over what's happening.
Okay, what slides do we have next? Where are we at?
Let's take a look, okay. Let's go back. So one thing that we didn't talk about here was there's actually two things I want to talk about. So one is config improvement, and then support for the commands, which we haven't gone over.
We talked a little bit about config improvements in Dan's section. So in the interest of time, let's do the commands.
Let's skip over that one. Let's show these commands real quick. Okay, so in project.json, when we were here previously, we saw these commands. Let me take out the Solution Explorer here. So these commands, it's really you're kind of exposing an entry point that your project has. And then you're basically exposing that on the command line. So for this project, if I was on the command line, I can invoke either one of these commands, web, gen, or ef. And these names are just completely arbitrary and chosen by whoever has created that command.
So I could make test, maybe, if I wanted to.
Yeah, exactly. So what I'll do is let me take one of these existing commands. Let's take the web command, and let's say Scott web. Let's say for some reason you wanted Scott web.
You have need to add a quote at the beginning.
Yep, sorry about that.
And that might be like a different port, maybe, or something.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Let's say you wanted this to be on 50/50 for some reason.
Okay.
So that's how that works. So let me show you what this does. So this will create a command that's called web, and you can invoke that with K. So you do K space web. And then this portion here just defines the entry point, basically. So what's the object that's going to be loaded up? And then these are just parameters that get passed to it. So if your custom command had some particular parameters that need to get passed through, you can go ahead and pass those through. Let me save this, and then I'll show you how can we execute those from the command line. We're just going to do a restore. I think everything's been restored, but just in case. So I'll do K Scott Webb. Oh, man. Just one second. You know what? This actually is something. I'm going to show you this in a different way.
Okay.
I'm going to show you this in a different way. This is for that daily build, and there's something.
Yeah, that's fine.
There's something weird that's going on, but
well,
I'm going to show you.
We've got 4 commands here. We've got web, Scott Webb, Gen, and EF.
Yep.
Okay.
So let me show you. Let's say if you're a command author, and you need to debug one of your commands. Let me show you how you can do that real quick. So right now, it's just listed under the debug menu. So if you wanted to load your project in IIS Express,
right, that's automatic.
Default, that's automatic. Or you can pick Scott Webb here and then do an F5. So I'll show you that it actually does work.
Sure.
And then I'll show you how can we execute those commands later on after we've published it. So here you can see it's doing something different than IIS Express. Here it just calls the web listener and then runs it. You can think about this web command as like self-host. So if you wanted to have self-hosting, that's where you would leverage this web command.
I use that example of test. Is that a silly example?
No, that's actually a great example. And this machine is not ready for it, but you actually could run unit tests, and it actually is with a command that's called test.
And if I wanted to be even more creative, I could use like Selenium tests or Phantom.js or some kind of unit testing framework and launch browsers. I can write one of those myself.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So the I should have actually gotten the unit test ready on this machine, but
it's okay.
But anyways, the way that actually works is very generic. So the Visual Studio support of that goes through K-test. What I mean is when you open a ASP.NET 5 project, the way that we'll recognize that, hey, this project has test cases is if there's a test command inside that project. And then the Visual Studio Test Explorer is actually populated through the command line as well.
Wait a second. Are you saying that if I have a command called test, that's a magic name, and you'll recognize it?
Yes, but you'll have to implement a couple other things too.
That's cool though.
And I could probably throw a blog post out about how to do it, but
let's do it.
Yeah, I'll totally do that. So keep an eye on the web dev blog. You can just search for web dev blog, and it's usually the first hit. But
awesome.
Yeah, as long as so basically the way that it works is if there's a command that's called test, we'll add that into the test explorer. And then we call another command line to actually get the test cases. So it's ktest -list -design time or something like that.
Okay, cool.
And that populates the test explorer. And then when you execute them, we'll just call it ktest. And if you pass a specific one, we pass that specific one. So the actual code for testing your project could be totally different and something which maybe is a total one-off to your scenario. But as long as you have that test name and you've got those same switches for your command line, then everything should just work. Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yep.
And of course, like you said, a reminder, not only is this daily builds that we're looking at here, but it's all changing. You can see that this is very bare bones property dialog right now, but soon it's going to have even more. And I personally think that the command stuff has a lot of flexibility. More, I mean, there's probably commands we haven't even thought of that someone could put in here that they might use for their applications.
I think the command stuff is absolutely incredible, to be quite honest with you. Like we're building experiences on top of commands already. So unit testing is one, scaffolding is one.
Yeah, entity frameworks migration.
Yeah, entity framework migration. Actually hosting your app is one, but there could be a lot of other stuff, and it's really just kind of interesting. You could almost kind of create a customized menu for your project.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If you wanted to have your own custom commands there. And
well, then I'm interested in figuring out a way to do JavaScript unit testing. So you'd have your server-side unit test and your JavaScript unit test, and being able to run those using the commands. Yep. And since Visual Studio, as you point out, under debug target will allow you to call those directly, everybody wins. Yep. So it's a lot of extensibility.
Yeah, it's real simple to try it out. Yeah, in a future build, those commands will show up directly in the.
That was my next question.
They're going to show up directly in the debug dropdown.
So somewhere there'll be you also have browsers, different browsers to choose from. So there'll be a way to say different browser and whatever target you want. So this target on that browser.
So you'll be able to pick your command, and then you'll be able to pick your browser